I wanted to wrap up remarks on the Declaration of Independence. Remember how we saw that really is a kind of syllogism? Now, some rhetoricians are a little disturbed that the major premise is a rather complex major premise, but there it is. You can suss it out. It really does say that when these rights are taken away to such an extent that they seem not to be able to be retrieved, then the people have a right to abolish or alter and establish a new form of government. Then follow all of those abuses of the king, many of them. And finally, the conclusion at the end of the Declaration, that as a result, the colonies ought to be free and independent states under a new government. Was there a very solid new government yet? No. U.S. Constitution as we know it was more than a decade away. But yet, this conclusion was drawn in the Declaration of Independence. I put some of Pauline Maier's writing from American Scripture on the course website, and I ask you to take a look at it. One of the things that I hope you look at are the pages that show the actual revisions in one of the drafts of the Declaration of Independence. The care that went into some of those revisions is quite remarkable. So, for example, it is said, he has suffered the administration of justice. He has obstructed the administration of justice. We talked about this last class hour. Or other kinds of alterations where the draft originally said, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to expunge their former systems of government. Expunge is changed to alter. It's a very sort of prudential change. Expunge means what? There used to be a category of expunging students at Harvard. What do you think that means? Yes, wipe out. Not only were you expelled from the college, but every remnant of your record and connection with the college was completely wiped out from the rolls of the college. That, of course, is no longer legal. You can't do that. But that's what expunge means. So they're being very careful. They don't want to say expunge. They want to say alter. Because do they retain some forms and some idea of the older British liberties? Yes, of course they do. Their argument all along has been that the liberties that ought to be afforded to someone under the crown are not afforded to them. That they're actually being cheated of the liberties that they should have. So expunge isn't what they want alter. There are other examples of this, including, as I pointed out, this long section on slavery. Gets all crossed out, it's all gone. Other long crossouts. As with most good writing, the Declaration of Independence, though it's a shame the section on slavery had to go because it was not practical to get the signatures necessary for it, but in general, all good writing, when you revise, gets what? Longer or shorter? Shorter, almost always. Unless you have some terrifically brilliant addition that really does add a lot. Why does it get shorter? Why might it almost always get shorter in revision? You're sitting down to revise it.
Because you're kind of just trimming the fat and like getting rid of unnecessary clauses. There's not going to be too many times where you're just adding necessary clauses, so it just tends to get shorter.
I've never used that phrase, trimming the fat, but I like it. The older I get, the more I like it too. It's, yes, you are trimming the fat. You're saying, do I really need this? Now, sometimes saying something extra adds something extra, but it also can dilute the more important points. And in the process of composing, you are usually thinking, and as you are thinking, your thinking is usually not as efficient as the final formulation that you would like to come up with. So almost all revision tends to shorten in matters of expository prose. It sharpens it. It hones it. It makes it tighter. And that's what happens with the Declaration. That's what happens with a lot of things. It's one of the reasons why it's good to write to a word limit. If you do write an op-ed for a newspaper, they certainly won't let you go on and on. They will say 850 words. And if you give them 925, will they say, well, that's okay, we'll print it anyway? No, they won't. They will say, you've got to cut out 75 words. You have to do it. And then if you don't do it, guess what? They will do it. So revision is something which is key. We'll talk more about revising the first paper in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to say a little bit more about the Declaration. It really is constructed as a pretty strict syllogism. That's kind of remarkable. We talked about the fact that its major premise is something that is held to be self-evident. It's a proposition. It's not something that everyone must believe. It's a proposition that the signers do believe. They hold it to be true. We talked about the fact that Jefferson studied rhetoric with William Small, William and Mary. He had a handbook of rhetoric, Duncan's Logic, which was published first in Scotland. A lot of the universities and colleges here in the United States at that time, including Harvard, used works that were published in the British Isles. Lincoln read a lot of things when he was young that were published in the British Isles. The Columbian Orator contained many speeches that were from individuals in the British Isles and in Parliament at that time. There's also something else interesting about the Declaration that I didn't dwell on much last time, but it's important to recognize. There are a lot of previous documents that the framers of the Declaration might well have had in mind. In fact, we know that they had some of them in mind. There's George Mason's Declaration of Rights of Virginia. There's the older English Declaration of Rights at the time of James II. That really goes back almost a century. There's Jefferson's own view of the rights of British America. So there are all of these other statements, and one of the things this suggests about good rhetoric, even in policy, is that it doesn't have to be completely original. You're not working things up from ground zero. It's perfectly okay for you to go back to previous statements and use them, not copy them, or if you do, give credit, but use them, use their spirit, understand what they say. So let's say today you were going to frame a Declaration of Universal Human Rights. Where would you go?
The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights?
Yes, United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. That would certainly be one place you'd go. And when was that drawn up? Shortly after World War II. Yeah, late 40s, is it? Yeah, so this is a touchstone. So if you're going to draw up an argument about universal human rights, that would be a place where you would go. And if you were going to frame a new argument about it, you'd be foolish not to look at it. It's been accepted by a number of people. It's been transmitted. It's been used for certain actions that governments have taken. So don't feel in your writing that you need to do everything from scratch on a certain topic. Did any of you look at what Mark Zuckerberg said if you wrote on the topic about, yeah, that's okay, that's fine. Why not look at what Mark Zuckerberg said? Don't copy him, okay? But see what he had to say. He was in a very similar situation. Maybe you don't agree with what he said, but he had a certain approach, and it's useful to know what it is. So in older rhetorical terms, what this means is that there's a certain degree of, the Latin term is imitatio, imitation, going on in rhetoric. And that's permissible. In fact, you're crazy not to make use of it. Otherwise, you're just sitting there and saying, no one's ever written on this before, no one's given it a thought, I'm completely at sea, help. The danger in spending too much time in reading what has been said before on a topic would be what? And there is a danger to that. You're working on an argument, you want to look at what other people have said about it, and you go and read and read and read. At a certain point, what's the danger? Philip?
So you never get to write your own opinion?
Well, yes. Or that when you write it, it's just a mishmash of the opinions of other people. That's right. So one of the things I would suggest to do, whether you're doing research for an academic paper or whether you're writing something for more policy issues or public issues, is get a quick sense of what has been said, a quick sense, without saturating yourself with it so much that you lose your own ideas. So what do you do when you buy a piece of land? Do you just stand there at one corner of it and say, gee, that's nice, I like this land, I'll buy it? What do?
You look at like what similar land is gone for?
Yeah, you check other assessments. That's one of the things you do. You check land over here, how much that sell for, land over there, how much that sell for. What else do you do? You're still standing there now. You've checked all that out.
You can investigate like that piece of land itself.
Yeah, you better investigate that piece of land. The old traditional way would be you walk the boundaries of it. There are very old governmental habits that still exist in some towns in which the mayor, the head of the government, every so often, maybe every year, every 3 years, will actually, it used to be on a horse, take a ride around the boundaries of the town. See what's going on, understand what they are. I don't know if that still happens anywhere that anybody knows, does it?
Yeah.
Where?
Well, like I worked with the land trust this summer, and whenever they get a new property, they would assess the boundaries.
Yeah, check it out. But that doesn't mean you're walking over every square foot, does it?
No, usually it does.
Okay. Uh-oh. Every square foot?
Sorry, no, just of the boundary.
Oh, just the boundary. Phew. All right. Yeah. Right. Because you don't have the time to walk over every last square foot. And once you do that, you're placing a psychological burden on yourself, meaning I've got to read everything on this in great detail. Pretty soon you're sunk. Start writing. Start getting your own ideas down. But know what the boundaries are. That's a great psychological relief to have a sense of what's out there. All right, so there is very much this sense of imitatio, but not going too far. So let me just give you a couple of examples. The phrase, our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Everyone knows that from the Declaration of Independence, right? It bears strong resemblance to many similar phrases used earlier in that year in state and local resolutions supporting a move to independence. For example, from Topsfield, Massachusetts, quote, your constituents will support and defend the measure with their lives and fortunes, end quote. From Ashby, Massachusetts, the inhabitants of Ashby will solemnly engage with their lives and fortunes to support them in the measure. Lincoln's phrase about the United States being the last best hope was not his original phrase. It had been used before. When the Constitution speaks of high crimes and misdemeanors as a reason for impeachment, that phrase is lifted from English law. There are many debates about exactly what it means. How can you have a high misdemeanor? Sounds funny. Does high modify misdemeanor or just crimes? What does high mean? Is it like high treason? It's interesting. Meaning treason against the highest office? And if high crime, does that mean a crime that has taken place in high office? Misdemeanor is a strange word there. This is one of the reasons why when impeachment came up under, say, Bill Clinton, there were scholars pulled in before the committees in Congress to try to determine what this phrase meant. But it was an older phrase. Yet none of those previous English declarations made it explicitly clear that it is the right, let alone the duty, of the people to replace a tyrannical monarch completely. To the extent that this was previously stated, it was done so not based on an appeal to natural law, but rather on an appeal to the monarch's abuse of trust, or oath, or office. Don't forget that the appeal in the Declaration is to something that can broadly be called natural law. Now, natural law has been abused. It was used to defend slavery. Now, there are many different versions of it. But one version of natural law comes pretty close to what we mean today by human rights, meaning by nature, people are equal, and they each have dignity. They should be equal before the law. So the Declaration states, the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. And that is an invocation of a kind of natural law. Natural law being held to be something in the nature of things and not directly created by human beings. It's an appeal, in essence, to a kind of higher authority. It's an appeal to an authority. It's a rhetorical move for what is in essence a non-artistic form of persuasion, this appeal to nature and nature's God. So, much later, during the Civil War, which in a way is a conflict that clears up, with a great deal of bloodshed, the unfinished business of the formation of the country. That unfinished business being sectionalism and slavery. And at Gettysburg, Lincoln says, not that the nation was dedicated to all men being equal. Does anyone remember his phrasing? Dedicated to? Close. It's a P word. Yes, proposition. Dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And that goes back to what I was talking about, is you've got to have a starting point. You've got to have a postulate. You have to have a point to stand. Dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. In other words, you're not going to prove it. It's like Douglas saying, I'm not going to prove that people who are enslaved are people. I will not do it. And Lincoln says the country is dedicated to the proposition. That word dedicated rings throughout the Gettysburg Address, but dedicated to that proposition. Now, what had the southern states done? They had left the Union, and what was their reasoning for having left the Union? Number of reasons, but what could one say?
They said states' rights.
States' rights, right. Did they feel that the federal government was oppressing them?
Yeah.
Yes. Did they feel that they were not having their rights recognized?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, that sounds a little like a certain proposition in the Declaration of Independence, doesn't it? It does. So does Lincoln mention that in the Gettysburg Address? No. He's not going to go back to that part of the original proposition. Because the feeling was then, once the Union was formed, you are not going to pull it apart. You will not divide it. But it's interesting that Lincoln mentions the proposition that all men are created equal, but not the proposition that you have a right to overturn a government that you think oppresses you. That would be really bad rhetoric on Lincoln's part. It would give his enemies and it would give his opposition a complete opening. Now, did they think that way? Yes, they did think that way. And that's one of the reasons why they seceded from the Union. So, to a certain degree, what we are dealing with is the way that matters are presented. And the faith, the belief, what Aristotle calls the credibility that you have in them. These are not easy things. In fact, they're often impossible things to demonstrate with absolute logic. They're very, very hard. Let's talk, well, before we go on to paper revision, has everyone taken a look at the fallacies in Corbett? Are they all pretty clear to you? I want to relieve you perhaps by saying when it comes to syllogisms, if you think a syllogism is invalid, if you can explain why it's invalid, in your own words, that's fine. You don't need to know what illicit process or affirmative from negative or affirming the consequent or denying the antecedent are in detail, okay? Now, if you've studied that already, great. You've got a handle on those things and you can go to them. But I'm not going to give you a syllogism and say valid or invalid. If it's invalid, why? And you're going to say, well, affirming the consequent. That's a fallacy. If you say that, and that's true, okay. But I'm relieving you a little of the necessity of memorizing a lot of rhetorical and logical terms, because I don't think that's the best way to teach practical rhetoric. On the other hand, it's good that you might say, well, that's a fallacy because it's ad hominem. What's ad hominem as a fallacy? Seth?
A personal attack on somebody?
Yeah, you really go at somebody. You see examples of this all the time. Well, I know that so-and-so happened to be seen drinking and gambling the other night. And it was a terrible thing to see.